Hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of the very first episode of I Know That Feel podcast. We're talking with Brett Stevens. I'm your host, DJ Whitepill, and here we go.
Right, we're as Western Europeans. I mean, I love this phrase. Pathologically altruistic, and I think one of the reasons is because we had to be. Right, I guess some of the theories is that the Ice Age, a lot of these, although we don't really see this in Japan as much. That Western Europeans, I mean, we had to because humans are social creatures. Every subspecies of human or subspecies, whatever, every race. We're all social creatures. We evolved to be pack, groups. And so, when we come across someone else, as the theory goes, we needed to be more willing to trust them because it wasn't like Africa. It wasn't like there was just this, plethora of people. It was like, fuck, we need to hunt a mammoth and 3 of our people died. Please come in, stranger. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I think that's definitely regardless of why it's the case, it definitely seems like something that's inherent in Western Europeans that is for sure our Achilles heel, that we're easily cucked,
Well, definitely. Definitely we came from a very collaborative, cooperative culture because you have to be in a cold climate. But I think there's something even more fundamental than that. I think we are people who think in terms of optimums and ideals and beauty. I don't think any other race on Earth does this. I'll straight up say that. I think the Western European, you tell him, well, we need to build a building here, a church or something, and he's thinking, okay, well, here's the design requirements, here's, the lay of the land, that kind of thing, but how do I make this really beautiful and stunning and a wonderful experience? And I think that's what Western Europeans did. And part of that, I think, relates to the cold climate from which we come, which is both beautiful and terrifying, and the need to be inspired throughout those long, cold winters. You need to be surrounded by beautiful, inspiring, hopeful things, and you need to have deep within yourself some sense that life can be beautiful, that it can be an experience of great pleasure, of transcendental joy, even of metaphysical realization. And I think that's what drives us. And our quote-unquote pathological altruism, I think, is just emulation of that tendency by people who don't really understand it, specifically our lower caste people. They saw what the kings were doing, and they came up with their version, which was, much simpler and therefore broken. What a king does is not altruism. It's benevolence, but it's an aggressive benevolence that looks at any situation and tries to maximize it, make the best out of it for everyone. But it's not geared toward people. It's geared toward the situation itself. The prole version, and proles screw everything up, is to focus on people and be like, well, if I were king, I'd just give everybody a free chicken, or whatever, a chicken in every pot. And it doesn't work the same way. That doesn't produce beauty. Kings, Western European kings produce beauty. Proles produce an emulation of it that looks suspiciously like communism. And that's really... We are a unique population with unique challenges, and I identify with Western European. I'm not a white nationalist because it does group together white people into sort of this generic white that I think will doom us, not just by trace admixture, but by destroying our cultural identity. I'm with the Western Europeans. I'm an American nativist, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think that European descended groups can work together. Europeans fight for Europe. It doesn't really matter what type of European you are. I mean, I would say my model on this is Kraftwerk, the Europe Endless, the song, where they're just celebrating the different parts of Europe you go to, and the downsides too, elegance and decadence. And you go to Paris and you're going to see some things that you'll be like, oh my, that you won't encounter in Berlin, for example. But, it's the variety, and that's important. It's our European diversity, so to speak. and we can celebrate it. We can work together for Europe, but we can't do that by all trying to be the same. And so one of the things that I've done that I think has shocked the white nationalist underground when it comes up is I've said, you know what, my tribe is not white. My tribe is the WASP, is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, the Western European. I'm not Catholic. I never would be. That's not in my culture or my tribe. I'm associated with this Nordic Germanic population that may have some other influences at the fringes. You know, if we look too closely in Finland or in France or in the UK or something like that. But basically, we're Nordic Germanic, and we look a certain way, think a certain way. We have a literary tradition, a philosophical tradition, and even a very poorly understood religious tradition. And these are all very important, and that's where my identity comes from.
Right on. Okay, so is there anything specific that or like a cataclysmic event that you went through that you would say red pilled you? So when you mentioned the LA riots, that sounds fucking insane. Were you already, you said as long as you can remember some of these views you've had. So yeah, was there anything in particular that made you think the way you do? And I'm phrasing this question very poorly. Basically, give me some events that red pilled you, and tell me where along the spectrum of red pills were you when the LA riots thing happened? That's what I'm trying to say.
Great question. You know, I think I discovered what I came to formalize as a philosophy very early in life, as in probably age 6 or 7. And at that point, I remember being one of the few kids who could tell the difference between different ethnic groups. You know, I knew that some people were Irish. I knew that Koreans looked different from Japanese. I knew that Chinese looked different from Japanese and Koreans. I could identify a Polish person on sight, that kind of thing, you know, already living in a diverse place. So I think I was aware of all these things, and then spent the next 20 or so years fighting myself, because I came from a society where people were geared towards success in such a way that they just repeated whatever seemed to be the dogma that made people happy. And that fundamentally insincere outlook will program your brain. You know, if you say the customer is always right, well, the customer wants to hear about how communism is going to win, you know, period. Because if you take a group of 100 random people and put them in a room and you say, well, what should we do? That group is going to agree on communism every bloody time. And the reason for that is that that's the only socially acceptable answer. Well, everyone's going to be equal, and we'll give people stuff if they don't have what they need. You know, we're going to make this work out somehow. That's, you know, that's communism, effectively. And I came from that heavy propaganda background and then went out into the world, and I had always had this vision, what I call nihilism, that came to me at a very early age when I was wandering through the forest, which basically is what I did as a child. I think I was born knowing that humanity was headed for a fall, and that I was in a society that was sick, and that people were mentally sick, and adults were alien, and their thinking was diseased. And so I just went and wandered around the forest, and I was able to make sense of things. But it's very hard. Varg Vikernes says, you know, he says, it's very difficult to come to an awareness because you are surrounded constantly by lies. And the key thing there that we don't focus on is surrounded. You're hearing them from different angles. Your parents lie to you. Your teachers lie to you. Your friends lie to you. They don't even know they're lying to you. They're just repeating what they saw on TV last night. They saw Seinfeld. Seinfeld made fun of something. They just bleat it out because to them, it's what they say to be popular. They want to have friends. So they want to be talking about the newest TV shows, the newest products, or whatever. And they don't realize they're being programmed and programming other people with assumptions. And I don't think this is, you know, like mind control programming type crap. It's straight out of philosophy. The words you use, the concepts you use, and that you depend on will influence your thinking. And what I call control, which is the centralized order that our society is based on, operates by making certain methods of acting taboo so that the remaining ones program your thinking. And in addition to that, you have the media. And, you know, well, I'm just going to say when the second Holocaust occurs, one of the major factors is going to be Jews in the media. Well, I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a horrible idea, and I think every time we kill off a group of people, it makes us into monsters, and we hate ourselves, and it's sickening. But who really was responsible for the Holocaust? My answer is the British. They controlled Palestine. If they had said to Hitler, "I hear you have unwanted Jews, let's dump them in this territory," I think there would have been no Holocaust to speak of. I think there would have been European Jews relocated efficiently and effectively to the Middle East, and it would have turned out well. But I do think if there is a second Holocaust, they're going to be carrying pictures of Seinfeld as they gun down Jewish families in front of pits. And most people don't realize how nuanced the Holocaust is as a study. It's fascinating. I don't believe the official narrative on a lot of points. I don't think the official narrative is wholly wrong either, and that puts me in the dreaded, middle path. So you're saying the Holocaust happened, just not as most people say. Well, that's correct.
Right. Well, I've heard that's actually true with most things. Like,
yes.
Well, this is a question I was going to ask you. Might as well do it now. And I don't mean to do this as a way to discredit people. And one of the things that I heard Jared Taylor say, which I think is very true, is that if you're a race realist, you have to be careful about what you say. Like, if you believe in UFOs and ABC, shut the hell up, because it's guilty by association, right? And so I don't mean to do this as a way to defame people and say, like, look, he believes this. But I think it would be a fun thing to do, because the whole point of this is also, for red-pilled people. And my question was, what is the farthest red pill, the hardest one to swallow, the farthest one you've swallowed, and one that's just kind of fun? And you can choose, how you want to answer that. I don't want people to just be like, oh, I'm a flat earther, and just kind of totally discredit themselves. That is not the point. But I think it's kind of interesting to see how far along people have gone. Like, for me, I definitely, when you get onto these forums and you start to explore certain things like race realism, you can't explore this on Facebook. You can't go through traditional means. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you find yourself with all these fucking crazy, free speech platforms where you get the biggest whack jobs there are. And I just haven't done it yet. But as far as, the little bit that I've seen, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole because I don't want to just be one of those people. But it's the Holocaust thing. It's basically, there's nuance to it. And it's the same thing. Like, for me, I was a Pizzagate guy, or I am a Pizzagate guy. And just the name sounds retarded. You could say pedogate, whatever. There's a lot of truth to it. And just when you say conspiracy, when you just say, anything with pizza, it sounds fucking retarded. And so people immediately shut off. But if you say, listen, WikiLeaks proved it, I can show you, I was watching the webcam, blah, blah, I can give you a million examples and say, look, I'm not saying that this is, they sacrifice babies and it's this big conspiracy around the world. No, I'm saying that it's very likely that a corrupt institution like the Clinton Foundation, it has ties with child trafficking in a third world shithole where it's easy to child traffic. That's pretty down the line. I think it's very plausible. Same thing with the Holocaust. When you go into these forums, people talk about it. They're not saying it didn't happen. That they're saying is that, that they weren't gassed the way they were. They weren't turned into lampshades. There's nuance. So I guess go ahead and clarify, add the nuance and whatever, 9/11, whatever you feel comfortable saying, what you think is just kind of fun to entertain, but you personally don't go down that road. Where are you at as far as, are there reptiles controlling the universe, or what do you think?
It would be great if there were reptiles or something straight out of the movie They Live, but really that's just effective metaphor. Democracy has ruined this world, and it makes people into the type of aliens where they might as well be reptiles. They're only concerned with personal prestige, money, and power. Well, no kidding. That you basically made yourself a reptile person at that point, even if not literally. And in the same way, I would say that I think things like Pizzagate and the Holocaust both have metaphorical power that really is more important than what the facts are. I think that when you boil the Holocaust down to its simplest essence, it is diversity didn't work. The group that proved to be the most talented and successful among the diverse groups promptly got itself killed because it was resented for being powerful over more so than the national populations it ruled over. The open pit executions didn't happen in Germany, and they weren't done by Germans for the most part. That was done in Eastern Europe, where, Polish people were like, looks like 80% of the Jews in our town work for the Communist Party or might work for the Communist Party, or it feels like they do. So we're going to put them all in a barn and burn it, And they did stuff like that, really horrible stuff. But at the same time, you're like, well, where there's smoke, there's fire to some degree. And there's a metaphor there. We know that 40% of the NKVD in 1939 was Jewish. In Russia, where the Jewish population was maybe 2% of the overall population. So there's some truth to it. And that puts us in a danger zone because you don't really want to act on some truth. You want to act on as much truth as you can get. And you also want to act in a way that's not an emotional tantrum, but a realistic approach that ends problems without perhaps, going to the extremes of shooting people in open pits or whatever. But, Pizzagate is a great one to use as an example, because I would say you're actually approaching this all wrong. You should look at it as a libertarian. Everything is a market. To me, libertarianism is essentially economics. You're saying we acknowledge that social Darwinism exists through the markets, that markets are competitive, and that therefore you can build some aspects of a society at least on that. Well, I'd say, let's talk about contraband. Every market creates contraband. There's some things that are taboo or hard to acquire, and they're more valuable. Cocaine, for example. If cocaine were legal, I doubt it would cost as much, although, American politicians always prove me wrong by taxing everything literally into the ground and then creating a black market. I was fascinated by seeing that with the legal weed. They made legal marijuana so expensive that there's still a black market for it. You're like, wow, I can't conceive of a bigger screw-up than that, but it's pretty much the norm for democracy. So anyway, with Pizzagate, you have the notion that wealthy and powerful people are trading around essentially third world children for sexual purposes. And I would say there's two factors here that are very interesting. One is simply the market. It's taboo to have sex with a child. Therefore, there's money being generated at every level. If you're a bored rich person and you have no moral standards to speak of, you might decide that you'd like to experience what it's like to spear a little Thai boy in the ass, and just what's it like. And we know that lots of Americans and Europeans tend to go over to Thailand and have sex with Thai children of both genders, because, that's what people do, and they're twisted and perverse, and we think that's weird, but it means it's valuable, and that's the first point. The second point is that it's a wonderful control mechanism. If I were running some sort of, I'm not even going to say organization. If I were a group of people who's colluding within an organization to get ourselves ahead, I'd want to know that everyone in that little inner organization was absolutely loyal to me. And one way to do that is to have pictures of each one screwing a small child. Be like, yeah, you do what I say or this picture hits the road. Well, now I've got absolute obedience in the way that dictators do. And that's unstable, but at the same time, the human mind thinks it's more stable than it is, in the same way the human mind thinks that eyewitness testimony is of a better quality than it is. We just have these little illusions. So I don't think Pizzagate is 100% nonsense. I don't think it's necessarily literal either. When these guys are like, yeah, I think there's a tunnel under this pizza restaurant, and it leads off to the Chamber of Anal Horrors for Harry Potter or something like that. I don't think it's literal, but I don't think we're meant to take it that way. I think we're saying, here's this group of people in Washington, D.C. and other places who have access to apparently unlimited money and power, and they seem to have connections to these NGOs that are shipping children around the world, and who knows what the hell is happening. And, it could be the mildest version possible. You can acquire a 15 to 17-year-old, thus technically a child, Thai girl or Thai she-male or something, sent to your hotel room for the purposes of sex. So it's not quite pedophilia. I mean, pedophilia conjures up images of people doing horrible things to, children, really young children. But at the same time, legally, it is pedophilia. She's not 18, she's a child in the eyes of the law, even though that's, to some degree nonsense. Your hardened street prostitute at age 15 is probably not a child in any meaningful sense more than a 40-year-old would be. But, it's there's some kind of indicator there as to a metaphor, a powerful metaphor. We have bad elites. They have moral standards such that if offered money, they would sell you a child. It would not bother them. And I think that's what I take out of Pizzagate. And as far as to what degree it's literally true, I have no idea. I think it's like looking into the Holocaust myth. Everybody's lying. Everything's in the hands of the communists. There's just lots of things you're never going to know if they're true. I don't believe the gas chambers story. I don't believe the ovens. I do believe that 1.5 million, possibly more, European Jews were exterminated. And I think that we have strong evidence to say that that's true. We have strong evidence from Albert Speer that says that they were used in basically a slave labor program, and that they failed at it, and that at that point the Germans stopped giving a shit how many of them died from starvation and diarrhea. And I think that's all we need to know. I think we know the communists lie about everything. So when some Russian shows up and says, oh, well, yes, comrade, this is the way it was. Here, we have picture. I say bullshit. I say I know these people lie. But at the same time, at this point, when some American shows up and says, yeah, man, we've been defending democracy over here, and let me show you, this is what those Nazis were doing, I say bullshit too. He's a communist as well. These people are all, ideology changes people, and they've given up their souls to the ideology, and they're no longer concerned about what's true. But, metaphorically, and to some degree literally, the Holocaust was true, and we need to learn from that. And in the same way, I think we should pay attention to Pizzagate. It came on my radar when one of my co-podcasters, Roderick Kane, mentioned some things that he'd researched and wrote about them. And I was like, with this many factors, it can't all be wrong. It might not be literally correct in every detail, but it can't all be wrong. And I was thinking of, there's a scene from Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow where he describes a shadowy organization that induces its members to sleep with children. And I was thinking, this is end of Rome type stuff. We've seen this in every corrupt empire since the dawn of humanity. It's, in fact, more exceptional to believe that there isn't something like Pizzagate going on than to believe that there is. So if that's your farthest red pill, go with it. I would say the farthest red pills I've experienced, sort of getting back to your broader series of questions, I grew up in a minority-majority area. I knew from an early age that people were different and that it was genetic. I recognized caste and class distinctions, which are utterly taboo, even on the white nationalist right. I say, when I look at somebody who's genetically upper middle class, I say, that person's got a 125 IQ, and they should rule over these other people, and that really offends people. Some of the ultimate red pills involve realizing that democracy is wholly horrible. There's nothing good about it. It's a path to death. You're better off taking heroin than you are being in a democracy. It will destroy everything. It corrupts people from within. It makes them into soulless reptilian people, to use our metaphor. It encourages people to only think about themselves. It crushes any sense of the heroic and the idealistic. And it's invisible to most of us because it takes generations to do that. It takes 200 years, and then suddenly you wake up and you're like, wow, my formerly thriving society is now a pile of feces. How did this happen? You're like, oh, did you introduce democracy 250 years ago? Oh, why, yes, I did. Well, I guess it turns out Plato was right, and the ancient historians were right. And it's basically, slow-acting disease. And I think that sort of the fundamental red pill that libertarians have taken, that I think is a really important one, is recognizing that most people simply act in self-interest, in material self-interest, in short-term material self-interest, and they have no consciousness beyond that. I think reading The Bell Curve was a huge red pill. Now, I knew all of that stuff because it's very apparent, and I've had opportunities to get up and close with intelligence testing and people who do it, and I think it's clear to them as well. When someone who's got experience with intelligence testing meets someone new, I think they have, within 5 minutes, within 5 points, an estimate of that person's IQ that is almost 100% correct. That's a huge red pill. We're raised in an egalitarian society where we think that everyone's basically the same, and then just magically some of them do better in school and do better in business and yada yada. And I say Charles Darwin thinks that's nonsense. We are our traits. And if you think that you are unique and creating yourself, get good and drunk and write something in your own handwriting on a piece of paper, and then compare it to things that all the last 4 generations of your family have written. And guess what? You're going to be able to trace every facet of your handwriting to them. You are your genetics. You cannot escape that. It offends people to say that because we're all such pricks that we want to believe we created ourselves. We invented ourselves. We made ourselves out of whole cloth. I mean, that's basically what the Garden of Eden mythos from the Bible is. It's Adam saying, I'm not a creation of God. I'm my own God. And God's saying, oh, really? I'm an omnipotent being, but you don't need to be an omnipotent being to realize that's idiotic. And the whole scene's written as very funny Jewish comedy, Adam's negotiating with this omnipotent divine being, and so he lies to him. Well, the fundamental clash there is that anything that's omnipotent knows when you're lying, knows exactly that you're lying. So it's just comedy all around. But I think that's how humans think. I think
That's interesting. I've never heard that take on the Bible. That it's a Woody Allen film, basically. So
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So now I'm gonna switch position. Well, I guess let me take this lull in the conversation really quick to ask you. I want to ask you two things. One, just a small, quick question. You mentioned white people needing to be inspired and stuff, and being out in the wilderness, and how you being in the wilderness kind of red-pilled you and made you think these thoughts. Do you have any songs that you recommend that come to mind? I know black metal's pretty deep into nature. Is there anything that comes to mind as far as this?
There's definitely black metal along these lines. I would say that early Ancient, Burzum, Emperor, Enslaved, Gorgoroth, Graveland, a few others like that.
These are all bands, or are these...
Sorry, these are all bands. Black metal, like most metal, you don't really mention songs. You would mention albums and bands. Because
so this is...
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so before we had started recording, we had talked a little bit, and you'd sent me a few songs. This is one. I grew up with metalhead friends, and, I was listening to goofy 80s shit. And I slowly, through my age, as I guess became more red-pilled and became more like, saw the dark side of things, I started to enjoy metal. The more I went to the gym. For me, my favorite is like the stuff that has like demonic kind of voices, but it's got to be fast and heavy. Black Dahlia Murder, whatever the hell that's called, grindcore or death. I don't even know the genres. But one of the ones that was always hard for me to get into is black metal. It's a little bit too dreary. There was only a couple that I really liked, which was my friend. It was basically an overlap. It's Wolves in the Throne Room. Do you know them?
Yes.
Yeah, they're great. So that's like and I actually really like this about black metal. I like the ambient kind of elements that are mixed in. So you're right. I have no idea what the hell the song names are. I would just listen to the full album, because a lot of the times it's a concept album, and the tracks kind of intertwine. As far as metal, well, I'm going to ask you three questions. One, why do you think metal, above all other genres, seems to have the most right-wingers? I don't know. In my opinion, that seems to be the case. Maybe I'm wrong, but that seems definitely to be the case. Second thing, as far as black metal, yeah, can you give like a specific album or a song for people who aren't that into it? Because it is it's becoming more popular nowadays, but it seems a little bit more like esoteric. It's hard to get into, besides the kind of meme stuff where it's goofy. And then the other question about black metal is I listened to Razor Fist, which is some kind of, I don't know, E-celeb metal guy who's also Republican, and he was defending a black metal band from Europe that they were like National Socialist, and he was saying it's just all shock, like a lot of metal bands, that's definitely the case, they I bit the head off a bat, it's all just kind of shock, I'm a devil worshiper, but there are some that are actual Nazis. Can you just explain, since this is your subculture, you've been doing this, I think before America.org and all that, so, yeah.
Let's start with the first question. Why are so many metalheads right-wing? I identify right-wing, conservatism and related theories, as being fundamentally realistic. That is, they are more concerned with results in reality, cause-effect thinking, long-term impact, than they are with how people feel about things. Leftism is based on feelings. You want a group of people to feel good about something, we'll give them communism. They'll feel great until about 70 years later, and then they'll feel really bad. It's like a lot of things. I want to feel really good. I'm going to drink a 12-pack. I'm going to feel great for a while, then I'm going to feel really sick. It's leftism is like that. But I think that the right is fundamentally realist. It's anti-human. We know that humans are liars. We know that humans are self-delusional. We know that groups of people come up with horrible wrong answers that sound really good. And we know that weaker populations like women and minorities always favor the left because they're more prone to wanting to believe the illusion over the hardline, conservative reality. We temper that realism with a sense of what the Greeks called arete, which is a drive for excellence. Meaning it's great to be realistic and say, well, this is the damn hard line. But then you kind of need to flip that around and be like, well, accepting all of these things, here's how we make beauty out of it. Here's how we make it a wonderful society that's an experience of joy and transcendental beauty for everyone who encounters it. And you see this across Europe. I mean, we could have just built modern-style boxes. Instead, we build great cathedrals, giant castles, lovely towns. That's the excellence side of conservatism, and I think old-school Europe was super conservative. So I don't think metalheads are necessarily conservative per se, in that I think for a lot of them, it's not articulated at all, especially in their younger years. They're apolitical. But I think they're intensely realist, and they're motivated by power. What's cool, what's amazing, what's intense. That sense of power, not personal power, but just a sense of like, wow, this is powerful. Metal is fascinated by disease, death, storms, violence, the fall of historical civilizations. All these things that are of intense power in an amoral context. We're like, yeah, is it terrible that Rome fell? Well, I don't know, but man, it was pretty cool. I mean, check that out. That's really intense, And I think metalheads are inherently fascinated by Hitler in the same sense, and quite honestly by the American West. I mean, we would be the guys who'd go out there and shoot 500 Indians and then go have a full meal and, go to bed and not be bothered by it. We love these kind of intense conflicts. We're fundamentally, I think, anti-human in that we realize most people are, not really possessed of a soul. They're NPCs. They're empty souls. And they, you may end up killing millions of people, but who really cares, because most of them never were alive in the first place. So I think metal has that attitude more than being, I don't think they'd identify with being Republicans, for example, or conservatives. And I think if you said, well, here, read this Edmund Burke, tell me what you think of this, they'd be like, dude, that's 500 extra pages of something that's a very simple concept. I think metalheads are very much cash and carry type realists. But that being said, the entire right comes from that theory as well. So they are right-leaning, even if not right-articulated. And definitely, go ahead, sir.
Just to interject real quick, I would even argue that, I meant right-wing or conservative in that sense as well. But even if we're talking about GOP, like Republican, there's more rock stars and metalheads, and I guess just rock is a big umbrella term. They're the only stars that come out and say, yes, I'm, like Dave Mustaine or something, or like born again Christian, and they're like, I like George Bush and this and that. I don't know if he said that, but GOP loving people. So even in that sense of the word, it seems like there's more in metal. Do you think that's just because metals and rock tends to be a white genre, and white people by default tend to be GOP, what do you think that is?
I think it's even simpler than that. I think the type of rock you're speaking of is sort of on the harder spectrum, and that's a more high testosterone adventure. I think when Kenny G votes Democrat, right? Soft jazz, light rock, that's a different audience, than people. I mean, because 70s onward, you're guitar driven, heavy rock. Even, let's contrast it to progressive rock, one of metal's ancestors. I would say that 90% of the prog rock bands were hard left, and the remaining 10% were so hard right and so realist that nobody that they socialized with would have been able to handle a 1/10% of what they believed. I mean, I think there are definitely hints in the lyrics of some of these bands. I don't know which way they lean, but definitely, Jethro Tull had some fall of civilization, everybody's delusional type recognitions in their lyrics. But, then you contrast that to other prog rock bands like Yes, where essentially most of their songs are about saving the whales and loving everybody. And you're like, oh, yes, these guys seem like communists to me. And I think they probably were. I mean, I think they'd probably identify with, we really think everyone should be subsidized. We just need to love everybody, And the hippie side of rock definitely had that. I mean, you have your Bob Dylans out there, and even if they have a slightly dark side, they're basically on the left. Then sort of in response to that, especially in the 70s, you had people who were like, well, we can make intense guitar-based rock. We're just not going to make it quite as fruity and detailed and frou-frou as progressive rock. And I think a lot of metal came out of that influence. Metal was intensely influenced by Jethro Tull and King Crimson, who were two progressive rock bands, and probably others. They were really influenced by British heavy blues, which is sort of the ancestor of all our heavy guitar rock. bands like Cream and others of that variety. And they were also influenced by sort of nascent quasi-punk bands and horror movie soundtracks. And you put all those together, you get Black Sabbath, which is your first proto-metal band. So were they right-wing? I mean, who knows? They were sort of converging, especially in the early days, they were sort of trying to find convergent lines on a concept and trying to figure out what they were actually doing. They didn't know. They're just like, oh, cool, this new opportunity, this new vocabulary, this new frontier we can expand into. So out of that milieu, I would say that the more high testosterone a rock act is, the more likely it is to be right-wing, although I would say you're correct in that most of those are kind of going to stop at the GOP. They're like, yep, we're Republicans, we like to hunt, we like booze, we like to have sex, we don't really want to pay a whole bunch of taxes just to keep the inner city of Detroit from murdering and eating each other. We really don't give a damn. We're rugged individualists, we just want to do what's fun. And I think that there's definitely a lot of that in rock, especially in your harder half of it. But I don't know if metal is the same thing. I think metal is very distinct. It's riff-based, phrasal riff-based, as opposed to being sort of more like static position chord changes in rock with a vocal phrasal melody leading the song. There's a fundamental musical difference in how it's composed. And I think that metal is kind of its own culture. I mean, it's very hard to say, Ted Nugent and Sepultura, they're kind of the same thing. You're like, well, they both use guitars. They use distortion. They seem angry. But other than that, you can't really say they're the same genre. And I don't place metal under rock at this point at all. Then you mention black metal and say, well, is black metal Nazi? And I say, well, holy shit, black metal's Nazi. All of the good bands were Nazis, or at least nationalists or favorites. And I am a bit of a bigot. I really don't care about black metal after 1994 because it was clear the genre ran out of steam. There have been a few standouts since then, Demon Sea, a few of the European bands, Samath, a few of those others. But basically, it had shot its wad by then, and, out of 1,000 post-1994 black metal bands, 2 of them are good. Where among the canon, the proportions would be reversed. You'd have a couple turds in the midst of all this great stuff. But, I mean, there were bands openly talking about National Socialism. You had Burzum and you had Graveland. Well, those are 2 of the most...
And it's not just trolling and just kind of doing it for show. They actually believe this stuff?
Correct. Yeah. They believed it and they acted on it. I would say that Burzum was a Tolkien-influenced, Nietzsche-influenced National Socialist who burned down churches because he saw Christianity as the source of the weakness in the West. They all hated immigration. They were all nationalists. Even the gentle bands, like Immortal, were strong nationalists. And they definitely weren't hostile to people who were National Socialists. Even some of the bands that seem apolitical were signing their letters with swastikas. Black metal is Nazi. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone in it is a Nazi. They're just from that cluster of thoughts that recognizes certain things as important, like nationalism. I think that's basically it. They're genetic realists, and they're saying, wow, we're this tiny population that's surrounded by this vast third world population that wants to swallow it up. And if we let them do that, we're done. And no matter how many rules and laws and economic systems we pass on to these people, they're not going to be us. We will never arise again, and humanity will never reach our heights again. And I think there's some bell curve realism in that. There's also just some realism about humanity. Human beings in groups destroy the exceptional and replace it with the mundane. That's what humans do. And there was, I think, class awareness in black metal, too. I mean, nobody will talk about this, but guys like Burzum, they came from the upper middle class. Emperor, upper middle class. You had caste coming into play where rock normally studiously denies that. No, we can't talk about that. So black metal, and to some degree death metal, which had some outright National Socialist bands like Infestor and Unleashed, broke that taboo line. I don't know if you'd say they were explicitly National Socialist. I think in many ways black metal was far more extreme than National Socialism. They're saying socialism, forget that. We're all about Darwinism. If there's people out there who are poor and starving, we want them dead because they're unable to adapt to reality. To highly competent people, you look at somebody who's poor and starving and you say, well, what happened to you? And if the guy says, well, a couple years ago, my whole family died, and I was in a car accident, and since then I've been working out of this wheelchair, you say, oh, good, so you're almost back on your feet. Because we're used to people overcoming vast adversity. We've been through situations like that. Our families have, or we have personally. When we see somebody who's like, yeah, I'm the third generation on welfare, I keep struggling, I just can't seem to do anything right, we say that's correct. You need to die. You're a failure. And, we're basically reaching for our gun at that point. We're like, yeah, welcome to Darwinism. It's easy as hell to live in modern society. If you can figure it out by this point, you're a defect. And we'll gas you or shoot you or whatever. And I think that's very black metal. We don't want any part of let's save everybody. And it's not surprising it came out of the, darling leftist Nordic countries who are terrified that some person somewhere might die from their own incompetence. I think black metal is all about ripping the warning tags off everything, letting wolves loose in the streets, and just killing off people who cannot adapt to reality. We see, people who are involved in that, we see humanity as mostly delusional, and those people as choking everything good in life. And so black metal is intolerant in a way that I don't think Hitler could ever have dreamed of. And I think that you'd find very few black metal bands that would say things like, well, we don't like Hitler. We're against National Socialism. But at the same time, there were a lot of them that also idealized Stalin merely because he killed so many people. Says, well...
I got to say, for not devil's advocate, I mean, this is actually one of the reasons I didn't like metal when when I was a kid and my friends were really into metal. It just seemed so LARPy. They were watching a DVD of Black Dahlia Murder. This is kind of back in the day when we were playing video games, and I'd see it, and it's a bunch of fat nerds. They're a bunch of neckbeards, and they would sing about, I'm going to rape the corpse, and I was just like, shut, you faggot. It's all fronting, it's all, that was my initial thought process. And then now when I go to the gym, I like it, and the way I perceive it now, I understand that it's catharsis, it's getting that testosterone going, and I think about how we're in the decline of civilization, and I can see the beauty in it, and it's one of my favorite genres. But part of that, and same thing, that's kind of the vibe I get, except for the metal bands that the ones that burn churches and rip out their band members' hearts and stuff. There's a few that seem real, but a lot of them, you look at the YouTube interviews and things like that, or you look at the Wikipedia, it's kind of like higher class, and it turns me off, man. It rubs me the wrong way when I think about some of these people. I don't know. I know music is generally like that. Even hip hop, there's a lot of people that they front and they pretend that they're low class and they're not. And I don't know. I just got to say that because that's come to my mind. But it's interesting what you said as well about I guess Western versus Eastern. Maybe there's two things that I was thinking of about why the Nordic countries. You'd mentioned that it's probably because a lot of them are leftist countries. The leftist Nordic countries. I wonder how much of that is the weather. People say that there's like what is that, seasonal depression. What is that? I think that's seasonal depression disorder, where basically it's a dark...
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, maybe that's the one. And it's basically, it's a dark shithole in these Nordic countries for the majority of the time. And so a lot of them are depressed. They have high suicide rates. And again, not devil's advocate. This is me actually arguing, and these are my thoughts. But one of the things that I actually respect about, I've been living in the East for so long, and I had always grown up with that. Yeah, individualism is the best in America and blah, blah, blah. And I've slowly kind of seen the other side of it. And something that I respect about Russians and Asians and Catholics, actually, is that I know there's a lot of corruption. I know there's a lot of downsides to it. But I think it's actually good to not be so Darwinistic and to view your tribe as an extension of yourself. And I think that's actually good, even in a selfish sense of the word. I think we evolved to have that. I do believe humans are altruistic in the sense that we are naturally good because it helps our seed be passed along. So I keep trying to bring you down to earth and say, all right, tell me one example that you got in a fight with a black kid and it made you red pilled. And you're like, no, so the philosophical nihilistic, so all right, let's be philosophical. So as far as the altruistic thing, I think if you view yourself as this giant, tree of life or whatever, where it's you and all your ancestors, as you said, I think that's beautiful, and I think you see this with travel. I think you see this when you do Ancestry.com or whatever. You are your family. You're a dead ringer of your grandpa. It's beautiful, and you go to. I would see some of my family, and they're like, God, you look just like my uncle or whatever. I love that, and that's your true essence. So in that sense, that true essence is selfish. It wants you to keep going on so that it survives, right? But as far as I think it's instinctual that even if you didn't get a serotonin boost or a little dopamine rush from giving money to a blind person who doesn't know, blind homeless person, even without that, I do believe that it's in us because we're social creatures, the same way that bees sting for the hive or whatever. So in that kind of sense, I think it's actually good to not be Darwinistic, and I think it's good to have these kind of National Socialist kinds of elements. And again, I'm not talking about redistributing wealth, but some sort of safety blanket, certain things that, well, I guess that those are all redistributing. You know what I mean? But anyways, that just the philosophy behind it, and even redistributing, I'll just concede that point. I think in small amounts, I'm okay with it because I think that I think it's good for you, for your extension, and and just living in general. So let me ask you about that, because this is actually a debate I get in with one of my friends. So he wasn't a metal kid, he was a punk kid, and we had both hitchhiked, and he's like a crust punk, and we both have grown up and I guess sold out. I mean, we were never the people who parrot that kind of bullshit, but yeah, now we're kind of normies, and we've been debating lately. And this is one of the I think an important question to ask someone, especially you, because you're also a nihilist. Why fight? And I know people misinterpret the word nihilist, so I'm not trying to get into that. I know it doesn't mean what most people think it means. But why bother? Because if you're a Darwinist, as my friend and myself are, that why not just be hedonistic? And again, in the philosophical sense of the word, not in a pejorative, oh, you're just selfish. No, I mean, why not? If all there is to life is just you and this one thing, it's the only thing you're sure of, you're not sure of anything metaphysical, you can't prove it, who gives a shit? Why not? My friend, he actually got his tubes tied. He had a vasectomy, and he doesn't want kids. He's just trying to maximize wealth and stuff. And I have a hard time arguing with him. I say, my only argument is I think we evolved, and I think we barely understand. I think psychology is a very soft new science. I think we're just beginning to understand just how deep genetics goes. So I think you and I probably agree on that I think it's more than that you'd like to admit. I think we want to think that we have free will and all this stuff. He also doesn't believe in free will. So for someone who's red-pilled on nihilism, on free will, on genetics, why bother? Why not just get a vasectomy, fuck the community, let the civilization die, and just have a bunch of Mexican slave labor in gated communities? I mean, yeah, why not? Why do you fight? What motivates you? Why do you give a shit about your people? Why do you give a shit about any of this?
Well, that's a great question and a great introduction, because you've hit on every element we're going to need to use. Okay, the first thing I'd like to tackle is the idea that the East is not individualistic. I would say that's 100% backwards, 180 degrees backwards. The East is the most individualistic. The third world is the most individualistic. And to understand this, we have to look at materialism itself. In the West, my people, we don't do anything simply for material advantage. We do things to make beauty. We want things to be intense, to be powerful, to be cool, to be new, to be something that makes life beautiful. And that, I think, is fundamentally what drives us, and I think it's what drives most higher IQ people. We can talk about the selfish gene, but I think it's an oversimplification because it's purely materialistic. I think all of us in the West tend to be intensely giving. What we are not is in favor of redistributive systems. In that, I think people like wasps are incredibly generous. If they see you have a misfortune or something bad befall you, they give you the shirt off their back. They will help you. But the problem is that can become, when that becomes an institution, it starts to become it's basically a market, a subsidy for incompetence. And that's why redistribution is terrible. And I don't think anyone's saying, some guy gets hit by a car, let's go shoot him because now he's lame, like a horse. What we're saying is that under egalitarianism here in the West, we've created a bumper crop of useless fucking people. I mean, we have, here in America, we have so many useless people, and everyone thinks, oh, well, it's not a zero-sum game, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, no, it is a zero-sum game because land is limited, and therefore each useless person you allow to survive, that's a tree that can't survive. That's an ecosystem that's not going to survive. That's an intelligent person who's not going to be born, because smart people tend to do exactly what your friend says. They're like, oh, this situation is screwed. Forget this. I'm going to live for myself. I'm going to die out, and I'm going to serve up a big heap of revenge on these other idiots, because without me, they're going to run themselves right back into third world misery. And pretty soon Europe's going to be full of stupid brown people of mixed race origins who have no idea what they're doing. They're going to starve and be conquered by the Chinese, and most of them will get executed. Serves them right. I think that's exactly what goes on in that type of mentality, and I don't blame him. I mean, I think watching how badly screwed up the West is, to some degree, the only intelligent thing to do is to launch the missiles now and just end it. You're just like, oh my God, this thing's an abortion, an abomination. But I think fundamentally, what fundamentally drives us is not material self-advantage solely. I mean, we want to end up being, and this is too complex already for democracy. People are like, well, what's the thing that drives you? It's like, well, actually, it's a hierarchy of things. And they're sort of, Maslow's pyramid, it's like that, but another dimension added, because we have multiple motivations at the same time, and some of them outweigh others, but only when that's permitted to happen. For example, we want to create beauty, but only after we've made sure that we're able to eat, right? So, I mean, it's a complicated thought process that I don't think language can even cover, especially at this point, because everyone's so dumbed down. But I think that in the West, we're fundamentally motivated by trying to do what's beautiful and great. And the fact is, you can't do that with a dying civilization. It's a dead horse strapped to your ankles, and you're in deep water. You are going to drown unless you find a way to fix the situation. And so for me, I could live for myself, but I don't find myself that fascinating, and I don't think it would ultimately make me happy. I think that what would make me happy is rising to the challenge of my age and saying, okay, well, nobody asked to be born in a time when their civilization's dying, everyone's stupid, and everyone's caught in this horrible illusion that makes them stupid. But that's what happened. And so now I have a choice. I either rise to fight that and do the best I can, because there's an immense possible payoff in that if I were able to influence the transition to a thriving society from a dying society, I would, whether recognized by history or not, I would be one of history's heroes, and I would feel an immense sense of existential satisfaction. Or I could just go with the flow and basically hate myself every day for not taking a stand. I mean, this is about bravery. This is about who you are as a man. And I think that, we can all choose to wimp out, and sometimes we have to, because it's just too much. Everyone's going to have some years that they spent either at a bar, feeling sorry for themselves, or working some horrible job, feeling sorry for themselves, or, living under a bridge in a van in Seattle or something. I mean, whatever it would be. I mean, there's ups and downs in life, but I think fundamentally we return to the fact that this is our time. This is what we've been given, and we either rise to the occasion or we think less of ourselves. And there's no getting around that. So, I mean, you're looking for literal experiences like, you were saying, well, this is all philosophy, and that's well and good, but that's not very tangible. And I think you're right. I think you've pointed to a defect in how I communicate. But part of this is that this is how I am. I'm very much driven by understanding the reasons for things. And no, I haven't had terrible experiences with black people. I mean, yeah, there have been times when my hubcaps have gone missing, or there have been potentially violent events. But on the whole, I'd say my experiences with black people have been excellent. Here in the South, we love our black people, and there's a lot of really good ones. And
I just think of the Donald Trump.
Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of that. I mean, the South seems hypocritical at first, because it's like, yeah, we love our black people as long as they keep doing what black people do. But at the same time, you look at a caste system and you're like, well, most black people are going to fit in some of these roles. There might be an occasional Clarence Thomas or Thomas Sowell, but they are, a percent of a percent of a percent. They're very rare. And the rest of them are probably going to do about what our ancestors had to do with them. They're going to do agriculture, food preparation, basic construction, that kind of thing.
Real quick, I actually agree, and I have been making notes. I have a bunch of samples I'm going to use, and one of them is actually David Duke. In his book, he talks about how he really loved his nanny.
Our black housekeeper, Pinky, was the closest woman to me, other than my mother and sister, Dottie. My folks hired her to take care of the house and to watch over Dottie and me, but none of us really looked upon her as an employee. When she stayed late, we always insisted that she eat supper with us, and my father expected her to join us at the table. I believe that during that era, such felicity with domestic help was far more common in the South than in the North. Often Mother, with me tagging along, drove Pinky home into one of the blackest parts of New Orleans, the Lower Claiborne Avenue area. This was in the late 1950s, when one could travel such streets safely, before the advent of the love and brotherhood brought to us by the so-called civil rights movement. Pinky had the same authority over me that Mother and Father had. If I didn't obey her, my folks would punish me just as if I had disobeyed them. Pinky did housework and prepared snacks for me. We had conversations about 1,001 subjects, and she always attempted to derive every opinion from a solid Christian point of view. Scolding me for improper behavior, she'd always intone, "What would Jesus say about that?" The words were really in the form of a declaration rather than a question, for the answer was always obvious. Jesus would not approve. To Pinky, there were no shades of gray to any ethical question, only clear right or wrong. Pinky influenced me to be decisive and tenacious, to think an issue over and then take a definite position rather than just sit on the fence. And that's a trait that has stayed with me. Concerning racial issues, Pinky had a traditionally Southern black attitude. She insisted on using the toilet in the utility room rather than the main bathroom. And if we picked up some takeout food at a restaurant, she always used the colored service area. She was opposed to socializing with white folks other than in her work. One day I asked Pinky why she had no problem with segregation. She answered me simply and eloquently, "'Cause I want to be with my own kind," she said. Although she was not of my own kind, when she died, I looked into her open coffin at her kind face, and I saw only someone for whom I cared and who cared for me.
Today we have prominent Atlanta attorney and Southern historian Sam Dixon with us.
I was often in situations as a child in which I was the only white person there. Back then,
Right.
Race relations were peaceful enough where I could be walking down the street and be involved with black people and be a little white kid, and I could be safe with them. And my grandmother had servants, and I interacted with the servants, and we had very warm relations with the servants. The Marxists and others would dismiss that as paternalism and say, "Oh, you don't know what they really thought." I do know what they really thought. And my grandmother had great affection for her servants, and they had great affection for her. And she did many nice things for them. She and her husband helped put their kids through college. When my grandmother died, I was 16. The blacks did not come into the church. They could have come into the church under church doctrine, but as the folk custom, they had their own churches. And when they carried my grandmother's coffin out of the church to go to the Presbyterian cemetery, the blacks were across the street, and they were sobbing. And I remember my grandmother's number one maid, Carlotta, came across the street with them crying, and she touched her handkerchief to my grandmother's coffin. And that was not something staged, as we would be told today in black history. It was a genuine sense of loss for somebody that had been an important figure in Carlotta's life, as Carlotta was an important figure in my grandmother's life.
I mean, I'm just being cheeky when I say a black person punched you, whatever. The same is true for me. I actually, on the whole, I've definitely had more good experiences than negative, and that's true with every race, actually. And I've traveled quite a bit. I've been abroad or hitchhiking, at least either if you consider that traveling within the United States. And I agree with you about the Mexicans and all that. I think it seems counterintuitive, but I think it's true that on an individual one-by-one basis, people are just people, and they'll help you. And there's a great documentary about these two Americans who traveled all over the world. They followed Marco Polo's footsteps, and they were hanging out with like Afghani rebels who hosted them and were nice and stuff.
The Afghan warlord was taken aback, but the letter from his comrade had all the power of Marco Polo's golden tablet.
And he came back and he said, look, it's really dangerous. I'm going to give you 25 bodyguards. We had 8 jeeps filled with rocket-propelled grenades, machine guns, the whole thing. You're going to move in here in the villa with us. We need to dress you as Afghans because it's so dangerous. You're going to have to carry weapons yourself.
Jeez. Okay. That's cool.
Dennis?
No, that's all right.
Dude, all you gotta do is pull the button.
Yeah, I don't want to.
All right, well, a couple more.
That's cool.
I like that.
I don't.
That's good. Who?
Not into guns.
When we were with those guys, I mean, it was annoying after a while. I mean, you'd want to go and take a leak, and the guy's following you with a machine gun. And you're like, please, I really would like to be alone right now. And he's like, no, I protect you. You know, it's like, no, please. At that point, we had been in Afghanistan quite a few weeks, and we had learnt just from the sound of machine gun fire, which we heard every single day, to discern the difference between a celebration, a wedding, a child's birth, where you hear, and that's just a guy celebrating. Or if you heard pop, pop, ta-ta, pop, pop, that's a firefight. Don't go out when you hear that. This, it's okay, somebody got married.
So I think it's true that in most cases, I think that's also human nature, even if it's different subspecies of humans that are helping each other. I think that's in us. I'm actually pretty. I think humans are capable of a lot of evil and it's shitty or whatever. But so I've had the same thing. But I've also had bad experiences with black people and Asians and all, certain things that made me think, everything society's been telling me is bullshit. I got jumped by Mexicans and stuff. But those weren't the things that red pilled me. I'm just being cheeky with that. I think there was just in general just living amongst other races is typically what does it. I think it's contemplation over the series of a couple weeks or whatever or months. So I don't think that's the case. But yeah, if there's anything specific in that sense, that's what I'm trying to mean.
That's a great point. I think this is something that we all need to remember. We all bleed red. We're all people, et cetera, but that doesn't actually tell us the whole story, does it? And we can even see that within white people. So let's just say within WASPs. Let's make it as utterly narrow as possible. Within English people. We're not supposed to talk about it, but class exists. And class is a proxy for caste, which is a series of bands of general clustering of genetic, intellectual, and moral traits. And, we look at somebody who's upper middle class and we say, oh, look, longer face, higher IQ, more slender body, seems to understand some things much quicker than other people morally. This is a different person. This is a subspecies within this subspecies. We look at the prole, the English prole, and we say, wow, round body, round face, short fingers, seems to have a lower IQ, seems to not understand certain things morally. This, too, is a subspecies. Then we look at the aristocrat, the German or English aristocrat, and we say, wow, long face, huge brain, very morally inclined, strongly positive personality, seems to be guided by excellence as a need. This, too, is a subspecies. And so we see it's much more complex than egalitarian thinking allows us to see. I mean, we say, when we're good egalitarians, we say, oh, well, they're all English, so they're basically the same, right? Well, no, that's a lie. That's a foul lie. There are intense differences between populations. And so this takes us back to the classical view of society, which is that nothing is equal, nothing is linear. We are looking at complex hierarchies, and our goal is to keep all these things in balance, all these different contrasting impulses, because although people may be good, that doesn't mean they're right. those Afghan guys may be nice, I may enjoy them, but they're still going to do what Afghan guys do, which is bugger little boys and shoot back at anybody who comes in town. Well, I mean, it's just
Right.
what they do, and I don't particularly care. I mean, what happens in Afghanistan is not. I am a cultural relativist in this sense. What happens in Afghanistan, I don't care about at all. I think they can keep doing what they want to do and keep evolving as far as nature has led them to do, and things are going to work out just fine. You know, I mean, I'm interested in my people alone, and in the same way, you know, a lot of people are very judgmental about the high amount of violent crime in the Negro community, and I'm like, well, this is how you keep order in Equatorial Africa or whatever it would be, and you know, I think that they should be able to do this. I really don't care. I don't care to make a moral statement. It's like, oh, you guys are raping and drugging and killing each other. I'm like, you know what? As long as it doesn't affect me, have at it. Knock yourselves out. Because basically, you know, I think you're right. Most people are decent. They don't mean bad. They just are, you know, and we can extend this to Hitler too. Was he consciously evil? You know, I'm going to get up today and do all this evil stuff? Nah. He was doing what he thought was right, just like everybody else. They're limited by different degrees of perception, by experience to some degree, and by genetic traits, just such as outlook. I mean, I think you know, one of the reasons that I really enjoy English aristocrats, if you ever get a chance to hang out with them, is that they fundamentally have this positive, opportunity-based, driven toward excellence view of life that is just sustaining in a way that nothing else can be. I mean, you show an Englishman a wasteland, and he's like, oh, there's plenty of room here for activities. You know, I mean, he will find a way to make something great out of anything. And I think that's what made the West right there, is that attitude and that mental state. And so, you know, we all are what we are, and nobody wants to admit this because that just basically said egalitarianism is shit. And it could be that really the ultimate red pill that you're looking for is to figure out what it means to say, I deny egalitarianism, and realize that you are thrusting back the weight of 1,000 years of Western history and saying, it's not just wrong, it's deadly. But I think that that's what we must do. I mean, people always say to me, they say, would you still support an aristocracy if it meant you were going to be a prole? And I say yes, because my life would still be better than it is to be part of a dying civilization that's going to end up being a mixed gray race group with nothing in common except my constitution and my shopping at Amazon. You know, we're headed toward doom. Anything's better than that. But even more, I think I'd like to be in a beautiful place. And if me being a prole is the cost of that, well, shit, that's a small price to pay. You know, it really is. At the same time, I would say that you look at somebody who responds to a question that way and you say, it's highly unlikely this person's a prole. Don't know what he is, but I doubt he's going to be out there in the fields, you know, picking the turnips. You know, though he might, because hard work is a decent thing and turnips are good, you know. And so you might find me doing that. I mean, you know, I love to muck around with that stuff too. But anyway, I think that it's what you've hit on here is really traditionalism is so hard to define, but it's a mindset. And one of the mindsets is we are not motivated by material. And I think this is 100% true, at least above a certain IQ threshold. Perhaps people under 110 are only motivated by material, though I've known some exceptions, so I don't think that's the case. The third world is definitely individualistic and seems most of those people are solely motivated by the material, and that is really an abyss. But there's exceptions there too. I mean, you go to Thailand, you go to Vietnam, there's some people who are extremely idealistic and even heroic, you know, and so they're fewer, I would say, than some other places, but they're definitely there. And, you know, that puts the lie to the idea that people in general, you know, equally are motivated by material only. But the other aspect of tradition, of course, is that nature of complexity, hierarchy, things in balance, three-dimensional hierarchies. For example, what motivates me? Is it materialism? Well, in part, I'd like to be wealthy, sure. And, you know, I'm not going to engage in something that will impoverish me and kill me. So some things are off the table. But at the same time, I'm trying to balance that with other motivations I have, most of which are not material. They relate to quality of life in other ways. You know, The Republic, a book that I talk about too much, mainly because I think we can't talk about it too much, starts with the question of what is the good life? And the answer is, it's not going to be a single token or sentence. It's going to be a complex understanding. You need to not be starving. You need to be prosperous to a degree, but you also need to have something that you're living for. You need to feel like your time is dedicated to something that's worth dying for. We don't have that in this society at all. We don't have a damn bit of that.
All right, that concludes part 2. We will see you all in part 3.